He does claim that it was not racially motivated. He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations as something that allows him to go to these places, and it's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate.
They determined that the suspect was on his way to Florida, I believe, and perhaps to carry out additional shooting.
All right. Sorry about that, brothers and sisters. I had to use my microphone at another place yesterday, and evidently I cut it off. Forgive me. Let me start at the top, and I'll be abbreviated. First of all, let me welcome everybody to the Shout Out Show. I'm Preacher Moss, the host of the S.O.S. And you are here. You are here, and I appreciate you. Normally I give a shout out to anybody coming to the show for the first time. I am going to do that. We appreciate you. But for the sake of brevity, I want to get into the topics and the things that you actually saw to start off the show. We recently had a spate of shootings. We had a series of shootings in the Atlanta area around massage parlors, and a number of the victims were Asian Americans. Two of them were white, Caucasian, but predominantly Asian American. And as you know, any loss of life is tragic. Any senseless loss of life is tragic. But I think we've gotten into the space in some regards where tragic becomes acceptable. And it's not acceptable, particularly if it could have been avoided in the first place. Our topic today is, what should we be understanding about critical race theory? And what that clip ties into a little bit of understanding how we got here. The formulation, the struggles, the strategy to put us in this, as the old folks say, put us in this trick bag, where we begin to see that crime is mitigated by the laws that it's meant to protect us from. This case is interesting. I watched the press conference. It was a very different press conference. There was immediacy to provide resources to the Asian community. Now, the Asian community has been a source of hate crimes ever since we had COVID. Everybody knows that. But it's been growing and growing and growing. But in the argument to protect our Asian brothers and sisters, is valid. But it's also the argument to protect everybody that we're not necessarily listening to. So if you're coming on the show for the first time, thank you. Like I said, I'm going to abbreviate this, and I'm going to give a shout out to my sisters. We got a lot of people in the comments section. Let me go ahead. First of all, Sister Felicia, sorry about that. I had a microphone problem. That was totally on Preacher Mars. I apologize. We have Sister Ree, who's at Craft Services. Sister Ree, those shrimp and grits sure to hit the spot after doing that voice recording work. And let me see. Sister Felicia said I was lip syncing. I give a shout out to my main man, Altaf. How you doing, brother Altaf? Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Appreciate you, brother, all the way from Toronto. Like clockwork, man. You like straight up, straight down, man. Like 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening, and we appreciate that. And I'm gonna give a shout out to the Chappelle family, because Mama Sion and Felicia, I am still on post for y'all. You're my family, and I appreciate you coming on the show. One of the things that I want to address in this press conference, if you will, with the particular officer, he used a word that is a religious word, the word temptation. He interjected the word temptation in what is this is a criminal action, and he ended the word temptation. Now, if anybody's been involved in law enforcement, got a speeding ticket, got locked up, did some time, whatever, been to jail, one of the words you never hear is temptation. And I personally was shocked to hear it coming from a law official, because I know a lot of people who have, who've been locked up, and I've been to trials and court hearings and things like that. And the thing that you never hear is, I'm sorry, it's temptation. And then I started doing some homework. I had this topic worked out before the shooting took place, brothers and sisters. But this topic was, what should we be understanding about critical race theory? So in a whole nother sphere, there's something going on in religious communities that may actually lay a little groundwork for what we're seeing. In religious communities, particularly I would say the Christian and the Muslim religious communities, have been faced with the conundrum. The conundrum is, do we accept secular theory like critical race theory? When I say accept secular theory like critical race theory, we as religionists, if you will, believe that our answers, for lack of a better word, for our problems, for our issues, they start in religion. They lie in our religious tradition, our prophetic tradition, however you want to say it, that the answers for everything are in our religion. And this is not to say that I'm not disparaging anything about religion. Quran, the Bible, the Torah, they're all holy books. But it's the denial that comes upon the subscript of understanding race in America, race in the world. And they've had this thing where they basically fired back on critical race theory. Now, for you that don't remember, we talked about critical race theory, which was a simple question. Really, the foundation is America is a country that's built upon what? Laws. We follow laws. We fear laws. We institute laws. We use laws to fashion life and movement and justice and all those things, right? Okay, so we're a very litigious society. The question is, if you have a law in the books that's disadvantageous to one group of people, is it really a good law? Is it a viable law? And for hundreds and hundreds of years, the answer has been yes. The answer has been yes. Up until the time that the people who were oppressed by the laws understood how the laws were able to interpret them and put them in a very public space and argue them at the highest courts in the land. Until then, people enjoyed the fact that they can have laws that handicap people, that were disadvantageous to people, that affected people's life, pursuits of truth, justice, and the American way. They did it. They did it. And at this point, laws are still on the books, and we're still fighting them over and over and over again. We're right now in a fight about what? Voting rights. The 13th Amendment. We're fighting over voting rights, brothers and sisters, and things like that. You would say, why? Because the laws have not been absolute and adjusted to the times. So now we're talking about voting rights and people trying to figure out, at the same time, figuring out voting rights, they're trying to figure out how to restrict voting rights. That's not the question, though. The question is, and this is the question of a Malcolm, the question of a Medgar, the question of Elijah Muhammad, Sister Clara Muhammad, an inordinate amount of women, well-known, not well-known, heroines. These women have always questioned this idea and live with the fact that there are laws on the books that restrict them from being the best they could be. That said, religion in some regards, not all religion, but people at the top, I would say people that feel as though they make the rules or establish the parameters of religion, religious practice, have moved away from critical race theory because there's a fear that following secular theory in regards to structural racism is problematic. That if you are accepting of some of the things in critical race theory, then you are an enemy, just like critical race theory, of religion, of Christianity, and even in Islam. We have people who don't want to talk about racism in Islam. They want to tell you what Prophet Muhammad said, peace and blessing be upon him, about race. And I believe 100% what he said about race. But for the black man here in the United States, he probably couldn't have envisioned that type of oppression. Or for the Native Americans, he couldn't envision that type of oppression. He was talking about what was going on in his space and time, and I respect that. But it's laid a space, brothers and sisters. It's laid a space, and, here's the thing I'm going to say, and I hope it makes sense. It laid a space whereby for the last 15 years, we've been able to be really lazy, extremely lazy about addressing racism, but also addressing structural racism, and, if you will, having the temerity of our religions and our religious practices to address it. Like I said, the thing that caught my attention was this policeman talked about this guy who just murdered 8 people. Hear me now. Murdered 8 people. But when he spoke about this young man, he did it with compassion. That we should understand, yes, he did something wrong. But we should have compassion because he was tempted. He had an addiction. Now, everybody here knows. Crack destroyed black families from now, going all the way back to the 80s. We're still suffering from the scourge of crack and the crack wars. The lives that were lost, the lives that were altered. And for 20-some years, anybody who was on crack, it was their problem. It was their addiction. Send them to jail. That's what they get. Forget the situation scenario. We don't want to hear about extenuating circumstances. You did the crack, go to jail, right? Law and order. And here we have a situation where we're forced to be, through a law enforcement officer's eyes, he wants us to be compassionate and understand what he was going through. What does that speak to? Does it speak to structural racism? Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. Because not too long ago, we were having the same discussion about a shooting that happened in South Carolina. Dylan Roof. Remember him? This was a young man that went into a church full of black people who were there to worship, who were there to praise God, and he sat there and prayed with him. He prayed with them. And after he prayed with him, he slaughtered them. He murdered them. And then you hear reports of compassion, that the police were trying to get him a burger because he was hungry. Now, this is not a beat up on the police. This isn't a beat up on the police. This is a tacit takedown of the laws that allow for this type of thing. I wonder oftentimes, if I was white in a rural area and committed a drug crime, as opposed to being black in an urban area and committed a drug crime, would my sentences be the same? Would my sentences be the same? I would throw out there probably not. I've seen instances of a black youth and a white youth who did the same thing, the same criminal activity. White youth got maybe a year. Black youth got 15 years. And I said, what's the difference? The difference is the interpretation of the law towards that individual. An individual over here, who in some regards the judge is allowed to listen to his story, his background. Was he troubled? And in that, he makes a statement that this person deserves compassion. But in the same regards, he'll listen to the black student or the black child, his problems, and he'll say he's a result of his environment. And in that environment, we're going to send you to a worse environment, which would be prison. You see, when you start pulling it back, it goes back to Ferguson. Some of you remember the discussion we had. We talk about, rip up the damn Constitution. Remember I told you that? Well, the thing about Michael Brown being killed, and this is really, really important because we're entering into that period again. We're entering into that spirit of consciousness again. And this is despite the fact Biden is in office. And I want everybody to know, though Biden is in office, there are a lot of things that have been taking place the last 4 years under Trump. Case number one. When Michael Brown was killed, they found the officer not guilty. They found the officer not guilty. They said that he acted in his parameters, of course, under the scope of stand your ground. Okay, that's fine. He felt threatened. We're not going to beat that. But it was a study that they did in terms of the whole scope of how people existed in Ferguson. And the way people existed in Ferguson was that black people in particular and Latinos in particular were not treated as citizens. They were treated as assets. One of the biggest things about slavery, the transition of slavery was, this is now my property and now this is an asset I don't own. And everybody knows when it's an asset you don't own, you're continually trying to get value out of that asset. Whether it's taxes, whether it's surcharges, whether it's I'm going to put you in bad housing and charge you a lot of money for it. Whether it's I'm going to sell you a hammer that normally costs $1, but for you, my man, it costs you $24. Which you could say legally you can do. But when they talked about Ferguson, hear me now. They started looking at Ferguson, and Ferguson essentially had established a governmental structure that made sure that it derived large pockets of revenue over black suffering. It derived large pockets of revenue over black suffering. The amount of people who got jaywalking tickets was exponential. The amount of people who had moving violations, exponential. The amount of people who did, if your child support was late 15 minutes, you were in trouble. Loitering, you were in trouble. And what they found was the police was used as a force to maintain assets. The police was used as asset management. And when you talk to the policeman who has the job, or the judge who has the job, your viability is tied into the ability to enforce these laws. What am I saying? The laws don't have to be fair. The laws have to be enforceable. And so when you see this young man in Atlanta, blink twice, and you're going to see the man choking out George Floyd in Minnesota. Because as much as we want justice, brothers and sisters, you're going to run into the same roadblock that a lot of us deal with, the fact that there are laws that are still on the books that are disadvantageous to us, and we can't get them off. We don't have politicians who have the courage or the integrity to get them off. And in some regards, we haven't built our own intellectual capacity, legal capacity to go out and argue those things. We're not producing the people we need who understand and interpret law and say, that's a bad law. A protest does not change a law. Boycotts change laws. You know why boycotts change laws? Because they affect revenue. Hear me now. This young man in Atlanta, and I listened to the mayor, who I actually like. But what does the mayor say? She says, we are going to provide resources to protect our Asian citizens, which is a smart thing. But in Atlanta, you got people dying all the time. You got people killing people all the time. You know what you don't hear, though? That they were seduced by temptation. That somehow temptation supersedes the idea that you have free will. And even then, I look at the economies of these places. You see, in Minnesota, Minneapolis in regards, the gentleman who's charged with killing George Floyd, broad daylight. There was a Somali officer who shot a white woman. He shot a white woman point blank. I don't know if all the cases. I know that it was questionable about his judgment. He's doing 10 years in prison. And we don't hear about him. But they're still arguing, they were arguing up to, I think, a week ago, whether this man should be charged for third-degree murder. Third-degree murder. Not first degree, third degree. I watched with my own eyes, just like many of you watch with your own eyes, when he killed a man. And he stood there for the cameras and everybody to see. And here we are, somehow huckabucking about what degree of murder should he be charged with. When it doesn't mean anything to George Floyd, he's gone. And here we are in Atlanta, 8 people killed. And we're about to do the same thing over again. Let me give a shout out to my brother. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother JT, I know I owe you a call, man, so be patient with your brother. But my thing I'm going to add, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? One of the more harrowing things that I saw in the last presidential election was not the Never Trumpers. Hear me now. It was not the Never Trumpers. It wasn't the Trump supporters. It was the religious bodies, particularly in the South, that was supporting Donald Trump. The evangelicals. Now, listen, I know we're supposed to make 70 excuses for our brother. I ran out of them 70 excuses by the first 15 minutes he was in office. You know what you know. But here we have religion that's supposed to serve as a moral compass for us, somehow being compromised. And the latest compromise was they could not even consider the idea of secular theory when it came to race. That somehow structural racism is real. I know we want God to fix it. But sometimes God says, here are the clues to fix it. And in that space, I'll add this. In that space, they sold their souls. Because lining up with Trump, the evangelicals, and some Muslims, and some Jews who align themselves with Trump, giving us this argument that we're not hiring him, we're hiring him to be president, we're not hiring him about his moral character, speaks to the very controversy I'm talking about right now. That somehow we can peel and parse people's actions away from their character. You cannot do that. You can't peel their actions away from their character. I went through it with Bill Cosby. People calling me, what are you thinking about Bill Cosby? Bill Cosby, Bill Cosby. I said, listen, I can't deny his contribution to African American philanthropy or the African American culture. I met the man twice. I can't deny he's done good things. Those are actions. But in the same regards, if these actions are true over here and he did that, you must consider that. You must consider that. As much as it may hurt, and that's my hero, and I like Cosby, but you must consider that. That is integrity. Not from me, but from the system. If I were to do something wrong, I'm going to tell you I did something wrong as a means of respect to you. Meaning you don't have to wait for a trial, for a statement to be read or things like that. I'll just tell you I was wrong, I was incorrect, and deal with the legal process or whatever it is I have to deal with then. And I'm going to tell you something. The law is not set up to understand extenuating circumstances, especially if you're black. It's set up for you to understand your extenuating circumstances are wrapped around a guilty plea, and you take a plea. Because the more you talk and try to explain, the more you infuriate this system that's trying to ram this law down your throat. Even further, brothers and sisters, I find somehow that we're even more amiss. Because this guy has been painted, for lack of a better word, in Atlanta, he's been painted as a sympathetic character. That he had a sexual addiction. That he had temptation. Bill Cosby evidently had the same thing, but he didn't kill anybody. But there's no compassion. And if we were to ask these questions about critical race theory, and this may sound harsh, but to my churches, some of my mosques, and some of our religious leaders, if you want to deny secular theory, that racism is structural in the United States, and you want to deny it because you want to say, no, religion's going to fix it, then you are a fool. And furthermore, you're not denying this theory. You're denying racism overall. It gives you an out. Because if you really start digging into this, you're going to look at your constituency and your congregations and your ummah, and you're going to find people, brothers and sisters, as much as we want to be perfect and good in this religion, who buy into and perpetuate structural racism. I'm sorry, that's the way it goes. And I think of all the things about religion, and I've said this before, one of the good things about religion, particularly black theology, the black church, is the black church has a very, very unique feature. And that feature for the black church is that religion comes to us to correct us in a world of things that are not correct. See, to correct something, you have to know what's wrong or what's right within you, and then go correct it. And that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen enough. And so to all my churches, all my Baptist churches, Christian churches, masjid, mosques, whatever, critical race theory is there for a reason. I personally believe critical race theories is an evolution of Quranic thought, of hadith, of prophetic tradition. Because you have to be able to look at things and understand, as much as we want to be Muslim, we want to be Christian, we want to be Jewish, that doesn't mean that the world around us is that. And sometimes all people have is this secular theory. And you can't be there saying, no, religion will solve it all. If religion would solve it all, I wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If everyone followed the good book and the Quran, I wouldn't be here right now. You know I'd be disillusioned. Because we come into this thing knowing, as great as those educational institutions are, in terms of Quran and Sunnah and Hadith and the Bible and the Torah and Hirakichi, all that type of stuff, it still does not mean that people who come in contact with it will give you correct behavior. It's a reminder of what to do when you don't have correct behavior. The same as critical race theory reminds us what happens when you don't have truthful, well-meaning, and fair law. You have racism that is buffeted and comforted and protected by laws that don't work. That laws that don't work for black people, by laws that don't work for Latinos, and doggone it, for laws that don't even acknowledge women. So where do we go from here? I'm going to throw this out, and I'm going to shut the show down. When you read the Bible, and you can make your thoughts or whatever. You feel a certain way about the Bible. And same way you feel a certain way about the Quran or the Torah. God's words are true. God's words are true. And the problem in the comedy, in my case, is not when people stray away from the word. It's when they stray away from the word and they tell you why it's okay to stray away from the word. And when they tell you why it's okay to stray away from the word, to make sure that they have consistency and leverage, they create laws. So when my moral compass is broken, it's okay. I got a law that says it's okay for my moral compass to be broken. And so when I want to go and do these things to black people and Latinos, and I want to put Japanese in internment camps, I have the wherewithal to do that because there's a law that allows me to do it. We still suffer from the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was signed into law. We haven't had an attack in over 20 years. Almost 20 years, excuse me. Almost 20 years. But people still live in the scope of being addressed as a terrorist or suspects. We haven't had it before. George Bush was running for office against Michael Dukakis, Governor Michael Dukakis, who was winning. And there was a case of a furlough worker. He was furloughed from prison, and he killed somebody while he was on his break. His name was Willie Horton. And from Willie Horton, they developed a whole campaign that demonized black men. And that was a campaign strategy. I say it was a campaign strategy, but more so, it became law. And from then to now, black men are demonized. And they don't get opportunities, brothers and sisters, to do furlough programs because of that one incident that was blown out of proportion in an election year. And I could see you using it for strategy, but nobody pulled it back. Nobody said, you know what? Let's go back and reevaluate what we did. Let's reevaluate what we said. You still have 3 strikes, you're out, mandatory sentencing. You know why? Because nobody steps back and go, let's reevaluate what it is. That's the structural racism that we're talking about. Those are the laws that are not correct. Those are the laws that let you say words in public like super predator. So listen, I'm done. I appreciate you guys. Definite prayers and blessings out to the victims of the shooting in Atlanta, but also revisiting the victims of South Carolina and revisiting Latinos that were shot in a church and revisiting kids who were separated from their parents and revisiting George Floyd and revisiting Ahmaud Arbery and revisiting Sister Taylor, and revisiting all these people who suffered injustice. And why did they suffer injustice? Because the law supported it. I'm Preacher Moss. This is the shout out show to S.O.S. Thank you guys so much. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Throwback Thursday. We're going to go a little bit old school Throwback Thursday. I'm going to give a shout out. This is my hang buddy. This is Felicia, my hang buddy. You back from the beach yet? Maybe I shouldn't put your business out there, but You sent me some pictures on. I was like, you just living it up. But listen, do me a favor, FC Boss Chick, please give Mom a hug and tell her we got a Scrabble game on the way. Okay, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sultana gonna take us home. Hey everybody, this is your brother Preacher Moss. Listen, I hope that you enjoyed your shout out show experience. We'll be back with the next show, the next shout out show. A simple ask before you go, please help your brother out. Click that subscribe button, click that notify button, and I'll see you again on this side of the microphone. You probably wonder what that smell is. That's me. I smell good. And the reason I smell good is because I use oils from Tarif Attar. So I'm not saying you can't smell good. I'm not even saying you stink. I'm saying you have the opportunity to smell exquisite. Check out tarifattar.com for some of the best oils and scents in town.